tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. In the name of a God that invites you to risk having your broken relationships be restored. Amen. Good morning. How are you today? Cold. It is good to see you. The second weekend in May is a little ways off, but it is the walleye opening weekend in Ontario. For many years, I would make it to the walleye opener in various parts of the province. I have more stories from these trips than I could fit into 5.5 years worth of sermons. But we don't have time for that today, do we? Do we? Do we have time for just one?
Yeah, sure.
I want to give the people what they want. I caught a lot of fish on those trips. Lots of fish. Don't get me wrong, any fool could catch a lot of fish in these spots. The fish are all over the place, stacked on top of each other. But even more important than the fish we would catch are the conversations that we would have. I've taken many, many friends and family on these trips. The space in the wilderness, away from phones and computers and technology, offer lots of time for reflection and introspection. I went through many years of questioning every aspect of Christianity that I could wrap my mind around. And on these trips, there were no topics that were off the table, none. My friend Eric was a consistent member on these trips. In fact, he invited me for my first time. And Eric was especially valuable for me as I deconstructed my paradigms. He had a good balance of laughing at my jokes and challenging my perceptions. I remember so many of those conversations, so many. But one of the most vivid was a conversation about whether or not humans were capable of changing. Was there a human who could change significant behaviors? Could humans really change their mind? Were there patterns so ingrained in the lives of humans that no amount of introspection or therapy or medication or discipline could effectively change a human? What do you think? Can humans change? That was about 20 years ago. And honestly, I still wrestle with this question. I do believe that humans can change and have even experienced it a few times myself. Maybe you have too, because this is kind of the Christian model for change, right? We believe that through reflection, through discipline, that we can create space, create soil where God can grow something new in us. That's what we believe, right? This pattern goes like this: action, right? We act, reflection, and then renewal. And it's a never-ending cycle. We act, we take time to reflect on that act, and then we are renewed to go and do things, to take action again in a way that is more in line with the ways of Jesus. Action, reflection, renewal. Is that true for you? Have you experienced that this is true in your life? I find this pattern in the gospel for today. For starters, the passage starts like this. All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to him to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Jesus tells this story in the midst of several of the older son, right? And several of the younger prodigal son. They're all around him. The tax collectors and sinners were definitely viewed by the Pharisees and scribes as those on the outside, who had left the faith, absconded with their inheritance and squandered it. And the tax collectors and sinners would have viewed the scribes and Pharisees as the older brother, self-righteous and judgmental. It's brilliant, really. Jesus tells a story about all of those present and really doesn't hold back at all. He seems to be telling the tax collectors and sinners, hey folks, You have squandered your birthright. You have collaborated with the Romans and stolen from your brothers and sisters. You have abandoned your values for easy and earthly pleasures. And Jesus says, but have hope. Not all is lost. You can come back. You have acted. Now think about it. Reflect on it. And you will be renewed. And he reminds the scribes and Pharisees that these sinners and tax collectors are still human. And even more than human, they are family. Pharisees, your judgments are not love. Through your judgments and anger you have acted. Now reflect, and then be renewed. It's pretty scandalous, really. It certainly isn't fair. It's not fair. But if you are the father and you have immense wealth, more wealth than your 2 sons could ever squander, if you have an abundance, you can afford to value relationship over treasure. You can value restoration and reconciliation over judgment and rebuke. But I think the thing that has hit me the most this time reading this text is to think about the way that the Father never tried to control or flex or show power. He certainly could have. He could have forced the prodigal to stay. Could have refused to let him have the inheritance. Could have used his resources to persuade the younger son to stay put. But he didn't. He created space to remain in relationship. He created space for the prodigal to come back. He left the door open for the future, even though the future wasn't certain. And he could have shut the older son down, right? He could have shamed him, could have ridiculed him and put him in his place. Could have valued judgment and righteousness over reconciliation. But he didn't. Son, you are always with me, and what I have is yours. He affirmed the relationship that the father and older son have, and taught him a lesson about love and family. I'm sure the father had been thinking about the relationship and how all parties acted, including himself. He had been reflecting while his son is gone. And when it came time, he is renewed, and the relationship is restored. This is the story of transformation. This is the story of the Christian life, of offense and sin, of forgiveness, of living an intentional life, a life of reflection, with being molded into Jesus. I hope this Lent has been rewarding for you. I hope that you are using your time to reflect, because there is a time coming when the prodigal will return, and we will be renewed and transformed. You and I will be new creations.